Ivy Wren stepped off the Denver stage at Kettle Bend at 4 in the afternoon and offered her hand to Corliss Broom. And Corliss Broom looked at the calluses on her palm and said, in front of the porch of the depot, "Ma'am, I wrote for a lady wife, not a farmhand. Take the return stage." Ivy Wren, 29, straight-shouldered, brown-haired, in a plain gray traveling dress and a plain small bonnet, closed her hand slowly. She said, quietly, "Sir, my letters said plainly that I had run my father's small dairy for 11 years after his death, and that my hands had been at butter-making and milk-carrying at least 8 hours a day." Corliss Broom said, "Ma'am, I read that letter. I did not read it to mean your hands had gone rough. I read it to mean you knew the general idea of a dairy. A lady's hands are soft. I paid the stage fare. That was as much as I owe." He turned. He got up on his buckboard. He drove away. Ivy Wren stood on the boards of Kettle Bend with the closed fist of her right hand pressed lightly against her skirt. A voice at the freight rail said, "Ma'am." She turned. A tall, plain-coated homesteader was standing at the freight rail. He was 34. He was sun-brown. He had, in his own left hand, a small folded newspaper and, in his right, a plain, flat-brimmed hat. He had heard the whole of what Corliss Broom said to her, because Corliss Broom had said it loud enough to be heard. He came across the boards. He stopped 10 feet from her. He tipped his hat. He said, "Ma'am, my name is Roland Austell. I run a small dryland homestead, 9 miles south of Kettle Bend. I heard the whole of what Mr. Broom said to you. I would like your permission to speak plainly." Ivy Wren said, "Speak." Roland Austell walked forward another 6 feet. He stopped again. He said, "Ma'am, may I take your right hand for a moment? I am not going to press it. I am not going to shake it. I would like to take it." Ivy Wren slowly held out her right hand. Roland Austell took her hand in both of his. He turned her hand palm up. He looked at the calluses along the pad of her thumb and along the base of her index and the small dark line at the second joint of her ring finger. He did not, for a moment, speak. Then he lifted her palm to his mouth, and he pressed a small, plain, honest kiss against the calluses. He said, "Ma'am, that is a working woman's hand. That is the finest thing I have seen on any depot boards in 9 years." Ivy Wren, who had spent the whole of the ride from Denver preparing not to weep on the depot boards no matter what Corliss Broom said, wept. Roland Austell said, without letting go of her hand, "Ma'am, my name is Roland. I am unmarried. I am 34. I have a small homestead, and a small crop, and my late mother's small kitchen. I would like to offer you a plain, honest marriage tomorrow morning at the courthouse. If you would rather not, I will pay your stage fare back to wherever you came from, without expectation. If you would consider it, I would ask you to speak with my sister Maddie at the boarding hotel first. She is a plain, honest woman and will vouch for me. Please answer at your leisure." Ivy Wren wiped her cheek with the back of her free hand. She said, "Roland Austell." He said, "Yes." She said, "Please walk me to your sister Maddie." Roland Austell said, "Yes." He walked her. Maddie Austell, 38, plain-featured, unmarried, ran the boarding hotel across the square from the courthouse. She sat Ivy at the parlor table with tea. She told Ivy, plainly, that Roland was 2 years older than Corliss Broom, and about 20 times the plainer, honester man, that he had run his dryland homestead alone since he was 25, when their mother died, that he had, in 8 years, never been rude to a widow, or a child, or a horse, that he owed no man and had never taken a drink at supper past a plain glass of Christmas wine, that he was, Maddie said in the plain, honest way of an older sister, the only man in Kettle Bend she would sit across from and say those things about. Ivy Wren drank her tea. She said, "Miss Maddie." Maddie said, "Maddie, please." Ivy said, "Maddie." Corliss Broom saw my hand and said, "Take the return stage." Maddie said, "Corliss Broom is a fool. He has said, take the return stage to 2 brides in 3 years. Both of them married better men within a fortnight. My brother is the better man for the 3rd bride." Ivy Wren said, "Then I will marry your brother." Maddie said, "Then you shall. I will send a boy to the courthouse. 9 o'clock tomorrow. The county judge married Roland Austell and Ivy Wren at the Kettle Bend courthouse at 9 on Wednesday morning. Maddie gave the bride away. The Kettle Bend sheriff, an old friend of Roland's, stood witness for Roland. Ivy wore her plain gray traveling dress and had put a small sprig of prairie yarrow at her collar. The judge, who had known Corliss Broom the previous Wednesday when Corliss had come in about a fence line dispute and had been loud about it in his courtroom, was quietly pleased to marry the bride Corliss had turned away. Roland drove Ivy home in the buckboard that afternoon. He showed her the plain, honest, small, dryland homestead, 160 acres of hard, sun-browned country, and one small good spring, and one small good cornfield, and one small good log house of 3 rooms, and one small good stove, and one small good porch step. He showed her the 2 milk cows. He showed her the small dairy shed his mother had run, and that had been closed since '78. He asked her, plainly, whether she thought she could open the dairy shed again. Ivy Wren looked at the dairy shed. She had run her father's dairy in Illinois for 11 years. She had built butter counts and milk yields the state agricultural report had commended. She had, in the last year of her father's life, expanded to 3 cows and had signed a contract with the Peoria Mercantile. She said, Roland, I can open the dairy shed. I can, in 3 months, be selling butter at the Kettle Bend Mercantile. Roland Austell said, I would be pleased. She opened the dairy shed inside a fortnight. She had, by June, 5 cows. By August, 7. By October, the Kettle Bend Mercantile was selling Austell butter at a fair rate and paying honest. By December, Ivy was corresponding with the Denver Farm and Stock Bank about a small dairy loan against the yield. By the following June, the Austell dairy was the 2nd largest dairy in the county. By the following October, 1st, Corliss Broom's wheat crop had, in the same year, failed for the 2nd time running. He came to Roland's plank table in November of that year to ask about grazing rights on Roland's south quarter. He tipped his hat to Ivy Wren Austell at the plank table, not able to look her in the face. Ivy Wren Austell served him coffee. She did not, at any point, mention the depot boards. Roland Austell offered him grazing rights at a fair rate and refused the higher rate Corliss offered. Corliss went home embarrassed. He was not embarrassed in the ordinary way. He was embarrassed in the plain, honest way of a man who had come to understand, at last, what a working woman's hand had been. Roland and Ivy did not, in the ordinary sense, court after the wedding. They were already married. They lived plainly and honestly at the plank table. Ivy read the paper to Roland in the evenings. Roland read the Bible to Ivy on Sundays. They spoke plainly. They spoke of the dairy. They spoke of the small hens Ivy had begun to keep. They spoke of Maddie, who came out for supper on Wednesdays. On the 3rd Sunday of their 2nd November together, Ivy Wren Austell said, at the plank table, Roland. He said, Ivy. She said, I would like to say a plain thing. I did not say it at the courthouse. I did not know it well enough on that Wednesday morning to say it. I have known it since the 2nd week of June. I love you plainly. I want you to know I love you plainly, and that I have known it since June. Roland Austell said, Ivy. He said, I have known I loved you since the 10 seconds at the depot boards after you gave me your hand. I did not know I could feel it that fast. I felt it. I have felt it every day since. It has not changed. Ivy Wren Austell reached across the plank table and took her husband's hand. He pressed her rough palm against his cheek. 2 years on a warm September evening at the Austell Dryland homestead, Ivy Austell sat on the porch step with Roland beside her and their small daughter Maddie, 10 months old, asleep against her chest. Small Maddie had her mother's steady jaw and her father's plain, honest brow. Big Maddie, the aunt, in the porch rocker with her mending, said, Sister. Ivy said, Maddie. Maddie said, I told you at the parlor table. Ivy said, You did, Maddie. Maddie said, Do not say I did not. Ivy said, I would not, Maddie. Maddie said, Good. The pasture went to gold. The dairy shed's small tin roof caught the last light. Somewhere in the yard, the 2 Austell milk-checking boys Roland had hired at fair wages were quietly closing up the shed for the evening. And Ivy Wren Austell, who had held her calloused right hand out on the Kettle Bend depot boards at 4 in the afternoon on a Wednesday in May, to a man who had said, "Take the return stage," without a moment's pause, put her cheek against her husband's shoulder, and understood that the good, slow country had, in its good, slow way, arranged a plain fool at one depot rail on a Wednesday afternoon, so that a plain, honest man 12 feet away, with a folded newspaper, could hear him say the wrong sentence, and had, in that one plain, honest arrangement, given her back not just the calluses her father's dairy had taught her, but the whole rest of a household on a plain, honest, dryland homestead, where her hand was the finest thing seen at Kettle Bend in 9 years. And so it had been.